So what is a makam anyway? Has this question been bothering you? If so, you've come to the right place. Hi, my name is Professor Birsen, and welcome to the Basics of Turkish Music Theory, Episode 3. In this episode, we'll cover the definition of a makam and how a makam is used in a composition or an improvisation. In our previous episode, we covered the diatonic pitch collection presented by Prince Kantemir. A makam from this collection is one that centers on one of its perdes, or pitches, like rast, or duga, or Hüseyni, or muhayyer. Now, as cool as that is, it's only a starting point.
You see, a makam actually has two definitions: an individual melody centered on a diatonic pitch, and a terkip, or combination, as a group of makams arranged in order to create a desired musical effect. This second meaning is what we refer to when we say that a song is in this or that makam. For these definitions, I rely on Türk Musikisinde Düzen, Perde, Makam, Terkip Uygulamaları by Suhan İrden. This is a book from 2020. The desired musical effect depends on the following factors: starting pitch, or ağız, and subsequent melodic path, seyir or name. Seyir means journey or path, and name means melody. Within this melodic path, there could be the use of characteristic melodies associated with a certain makam, or emphasis on a particular perde that's common to do in that makam. And finally, the cadence, or karar. Returning to Kantemir's pitch collection, we see that it roughly comprises two octaves, the one from yega to charga, and another from neva to tiz neva, and then extending by one more note to tiz Hüseyni. If my melody begins in the lower octave, I will have a rising seyir. This is true for the pitches Irak, rast, duga, sega, and charga. Ashiran and yega function primarily as melodic perdes in the lower register. Makams that begin with these perdes will generally ascend to the upper perdes and then ultimately descend to make a final cadence back onto themselves. Looking at an example from one of the lower octave perdes, I'm going to start with rast. So this is the makam, rast, and then nakış beste is the type of genre that it is. It's a vocal piece. This is the opening text, Ahmed Nesimi Subhudem. It's actually Farsi, which is mixed up with some Ottoman Turkish in there. So it's not pure Turkish. This is a rather old piece by Meragi. The first thing that I'll call your attention to is the key signature. We have the 1 comma lowered B and the 1 comma lowered F sharp. So we are in the diatonic pitch collection. And all of these pitches here will be from that. Now, we start off with a rast. And notice just how many times in this opening line of music we actually go to the rast. So first we go down to the E through F sharp. So rast, Irak, ashiran, Irak, back to the rast. And then we do a little bit of an encircling with both neighbor notes on either side. So let me just connect all of these. Now we move off of the rast really to the duga, and that's got its own little lower neighbors. And then we pass through ultimately to sega, and then we land on the rast. So this opening melody approaches the rast from below and then again from above. So rast down to the E, back to the G for rast, and then up to the A, to the B, and then back down to the G for rast. So there's no doubt that we're sort of making the rast the center of this melody. On top of that, if that wasn't enough, this opening tune is actually a very characteristic melody of the makam rast. Many pieces in rast will feature a descent from Rast down to Ashiran and then back to Rast, or just rising from Ashiran up to Rast. So let me just play that. Okay, that often happens in Rast, and you can see almost why that is because it really highlights the Rast as the main pitch of that melody. In the next line, we have here measure 3, another Rast, and we're doing essentially the same thing as we did in the first measure, except now we are kind of expanding the range a little bit ahead of the Sega. So now we're pushing up ahead to Neva. And then we fall back down to the Rast. And you can see when I circle these pitches, I just kind of am highlighting segments of the scale that are being performed. So now we make it all the way up to the Neva. Our range has expanded in the upper part above Rast. This opening, the first 4 measures, is enough to let us say that we have a Rast Makam. In other words, we have a full melody that has a beginning, a middle, and an ending, and the ending cadences on the pitch Rast, on the parallel of Rast. So it's already like the small scale definition of Makam. Now here in measure 5, the next phrase will begin. We pick up from the Rast, but then we jump up to the Neva. And we get kind of like another similar encircling melody back to the Neva, right? So we go down Charga to Sega and then back up. And then the Neva has its little neighbors, Husseini and Charga on either side of it. But we have like a little moment where we're highlighting the Neva as a pitch. And it's interesting because when we do that and we relate it to the Rast, like a perfect fifth, like it does in measure 5 here, Neva's name actually becomes technically Penchka. And Penchka is Farsi for 5th scale degree. Then we get this little connecting melody, and notice here in F natural, this is the pitch, its name is Ajam. So we have taken away Evich and we've changed it to become Ajam. That happens a lot in all the Makams. For some reason, when the melody is going down to the final note, it will substitute Evich for Ajam. So that happens. Measures 7 and 8 are essentially the same thing. Rast pointing to the Neva or Penchka, if you will, and then kind of encircling that note and stopping there. So we've got another little Makam presented here, right? This is Neva, but the Penchka version. And then in measure 9, we have Rast pointing back down towards itself. So here's a little tune that actually is another characteristic melody. Rast jumping up to the Husseini, and then we head down by scale, and I'm just going to sort of skip over the notes that revisit where we already were, and then we wind up landing on the Rast. So I'm going to highlight that in green here. This kind of leap up to the Husseini is very characteristic in Rast. And you can hear how beautifully tuned it is. It sounds like a major 6, like perfectly in tune. Then you kind of see it happening again. And it connects with the previous characteristic melody. and the whole rest of this section winds up cadencing on the Rast Makam. So if you sum everything up, we've got like an A section that is Rast Makam, and then you've got like a B section, which is focusing on the Neva perde, which we call Penchka Makam, and then we got back to the Rast. So we can say like Rast plus Penchka plus Rast equals the Rast Terkib.
Turkish music, therefore, is a lot like other modal traditions, like Hindustani classical music. This is because a mode's identity depends on the presentation of certain characteristic features. These features, when presented well enough, will instill in the listener's mind that makam, and then they can enjoy the process of its unfolding. I hope you will too. Thanks.